So we really wanted today this to be our sine die joint conference. We know that tomorrow we should be doing the final work. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we really felt like we should look at the whole session as a whole, especially right now before Republican leadership starts putting their framework on what's happened this session. We really started this session very clear on what we needed to work on. We'd heard a mandate from people across the state about affordability and the challenges around the cost of living. We definitely continue to hear the need for quality education for every student, and tons from folks about corruption and concerns about our systems and how they root out corruption. And really what we're seeing is this session and this budget are going to lead to more of the same. And I just briefly want to say my son is graduating high school tonight, so I may be a little bit in a reflective mode, but watching him in school, in our public schools for 14 years, really has given me a perspective and on what has and has not changed. And what I saw this week as he went through his elementary school, did that walkthrough in his cap and gown, and all those sweet little kids clapped for him and gave him high fives. I saw a few veteran teachers. I was really glad to see some of those veteran teachers still there. I'm grateful that they're committed to kids still and that they're so thrilled to see them, which is what I see again and again from our teachers, is them showing up, really believing in every kid. Because I'll tell you, my kid was a knucklehead in elementary school. They dealt with a lot from him, and they were so pleased to see him. I also saw people who were still trying to show up for the school. But what I've seen at his high school is all the increased mandates. You know, he's done the FAFSA. He's done all those additional mandates we put on the schools. Meanwhile, he's had fewer and fewer experienced teachers, more and more experienced teachers leaving the school. And so that leaves us with real challenges around transitioning kids to those next steps. We have counselors who are running crazy, trying to implement all these checklists for graduation all year long, these poor counselors. Their focus was, can we get these checklists done, rather than how can we help you with those next steps for your life? And so I just want to say, as a parent who's about to have a kid graduate from our public schools, I'm afraid it's going to be more of the same from what we've implemented this session, and I know we can do better. I want to point out a few things around our priorities of putting people over politics. I want to point out a few high points and a few low points. High points, I was really proud that the Senate Democrats got to be part of keeping the sneaky Sooner Care rollbacks off the August ballot. You know, we almost had the Sooner Care rollbacks on the August ballot. Very proud we were able to help block that. We also are really proud Senator Hicks ran a great bill that was part of a bipartisan package on reducing corruption in our purchasing process. And I'm proud that that state process that spends so much money in our communities, that Senator Hicks was part of that bipartisan work to try to do better there. In terms of big missed opportunities, overall in the budget, we saw Republicans passing tax cuts and tax credits for more well-connected people and businesses. We saw venture capital deductions. We saw broadband tax cuts. We saw tax cuts in areas for special interests, but we did not see things that focused on the regular Oklahomans and their needs. We saw a less transparent and very rushed budget process, and what that meant was Republicans were making those priorities behind closed doors. We did not see public stakeholder voices. Certainly not our voices, but not the public either. And then we are ending session early. And really, I think what that tells constituents is that Republicans are okay with leaving a lot of unsolved problems and leaving a lot of big fires burning. So that's my big takeaways. I want to hand off to Senator Hicks. Sorry.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Senator Hicks. I represent Senate District 40. I serve as the assistant floor leader for the Democratic caucus. And so I really want to talk about affordability because, as you heard, there are a lot of challenges around affordability. And when you even see the newest released numbers yesterday on inflation, it really begs the question of why did the state not take those concerns seriously from our constituents? And we heard loud and clear heading into session that these were the major issues that all of us are trying to stretch a dollar or stretch a dime into a dollar, right? So a couple of things that were good. So high points, 211 and 988 funding. Senator Dossett carried the 211 funding bill, which really is all about connecting people to the right resource when they're facing a crisis of some kind in their community. And 988, obviously, we know is our mental health helpline. I also passed a bill on preventive health screenings for families detecting early signs of type 1 diabetes, making sure that these antibodies are caught early in the process before T1D becomes the traditional onset, prevents catastrophic health bills, right? Diabetic ketoacidosis, not cheap, and it also has long-term consequences for the family. Additionally, we saw a cost of living adjustment for our retired police, firefighters, teachers, and state employees, and this is the first since 2020, ranging from 2 to 6%. Will help those retirees just a little bit, but we know that that's not enough. When you layer that on top of the rising cost of inflation, obviously since 2020, that is a very different picture, and we should have done more to help our retirees. And this budget also includes some really important water infrastructure for housing projects, and Senator Kirt was the lead on making sure that that really met a specific metrics to help with affordable housing. The misses on affordability. We did not see any meaningful increase in living wages. I know I had a bill. I know Senator Nice also had a bill, but that means that it's now in the voters' hands. We know that the June primaries are right around the corner, and there's a very important state question 832 on the ballot that will let the people decide if we need to raise the minimum wage. We heard a lot this session about how many folks are relying on SNAP, TANF, other state benefits like Medicaid or Sooner Care, but again, instead of actually addressing the root causes of why folks need some additional assistance and giving people the opportunity to make a living wage, we're going to kick that can on down the road. And so I hope that the people will show up in June. We also didn't see any meaningful investment in improving health or mental health. I want to just touch briefly on the fact that I represent Integris Health Systems here in the heart of Oklahoma City, and it's not a secret to those in the room that there have been some significant RIFs, or reduction in force, lots of layoffs, and they said this is just the first in a series that are to come. And so at a time when we're seeing our hospitals, which, from my colleagues, say that the urban areas are doing just fine, you start to see these massive layoffs right here in the heart of Oklahoma City. It just speaks to the bigger question around H.R. 1, or the big, beautiful bill, and the havoc that it is absolutely wreaking in a state like Oklahoma, who has been overly reliant on federal assistance. And again, we're not willing to pick up the slack at the state level, and it's putting our hospitals in jeopardy. We also didn't address our child care crisis. In fact, we're going to make it worse because they've rolled the subsidies back. Instead of 80% of the federal poverty limit, they've rolled that subsidy assistance down to 50%. That's cutting out thousands of families who desperately want to work, who desperately want to participate in our economy, and do not have a high-quality facility nearby to be able to take them to. And mark my words, it's going to get worse. This year is going to be a massive reflection on our ineffort around childcare. And we didn't do any serious utility cost affordability reforms, and we definitely didn't address the property insurance cost with one particular bill that did not make it through. Senator Kirt had a really incredible bill that would have got to the heart of the rising costs. So we've passed something. It's undetermined yet whether or not this will actually bring relief to people who are, quite frankly, being price gouged on the cost of property insurance. So I'm going to briefly talk on education. You guys know I could stand up here at the mic for an hour just talking about education. But when we're talking about the things that passed this year, let me highlight a couple of glimmers of hope. There was a very small teacher pay raise, $2,000 to the beginning or starting teacher salary. That definitely means that a lot of folks won't see any increase this year. Additionally, we were able to protect ELL students and ensure that early intervention before retention through the Strong Readers Act. So as I'm sure many of you guys have been talking with teachers in the weeks since we passed the Strong Readers Act, and it is with a heavy heart that I've had a lot of those very intense conversations with folks who are absolutely furious that this is going to overcrowd our third grade classrooms. It's not going to lead to positive outcomes for students because we know that retention doesn't work. It actually funnels that pipeline to prison, because if we don't get kids before they get to third grade on that course for the gift of literacy, the outcomes could not be more stark in contrast. And so I am proud that we were able to work with the majority party and get some very important protections around special education as well. But we know that this piece of legislation had some parts in it that a lot of us had to hold our nose on, because we definitely don't want retention at all, but we definitely didn't want retention without early intervention. And we were able to extend teacher benefits with FMLA and bereavement leave, and Senator Mann was the lead on making sure that classroom teachers have those benefits in their compensation package. But it's no secret that we're still the bottom in education funding. We know that class sizes are too large, and as I already mentioned, with the threat of retention, it makes a lot of folks have to take a really deep breath. And our experienced educators are still leaving, like you heard Senator Kirt talk about. I will actually be participating in a clap out this week, looking at my former students as they venture off into the great adult life, right? And it makes me really sad that the core team of teachers that I taught with in fourth grade, not one of us are still teaching in that facility, and that speaks volumes. And the biggest hit to education this year is the expansion of unaccountable vouchers. A $25 million bump, bringing the total to $275 million. At this point in time, it's almost $1 billion that have been spent on education that we have no meaningful reporting data. We don't know if those students are being successful. We don't know how the schools are even utilizing the funds because there are no reporting requirements whatsoever. And my constituents continue to remain very vigilant on putting public dollars in public schools. Imagine if we had taken that $1 billion and invested it in public education. Would we be talking about the exodus of teachers today? I don't know. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to the House.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. I am Cyndi Munson, State Representative for House District 85 and the House Democratic Leader. When we came into this session, we were focused as a caucus on making sure that Oklahomans' paychecks would keep up. And that meant focusing on affordability in the sense of what costs are rising and what are things that we as a legislature could do to help working families afford the basic necessities that we know that they need to take care of themselves and to take care of their families. When you look at the contrast of what House Democrats put forward as our priorities, bills that targeted working families in terms of tax relief, expanding the earned income tax credit, expanding the sales tax relief credit. These are credits that not only protect our revenue, but also allow for working families to just get a little bit of relief. Think about where we are today. Gas in Tulsa, $4.19 a gallon. I think multiple people have shared photos of I think a local gas station and letting everybody know just how much gas is. But we know, because I know everyone in this room, we're putting gas in our car and we know how difficult it is to stretch that paycheck. And so we're living in this reality right now of what's happening at the federal level, what's happening globally, and not coming up with state solutions. Republicans decided to put $500 million into programs like the school voucher program, pregnancy centers, funding these crisis centers and nonprofit organizations that don't have any accountability to state government. There's no reporting, there's no transparency on where those dollars go, and we know that they're not actually helping women in terms of improving health care in Oklahoma, and we continue to rank at the bottom when it comes to healthcare access for women. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, and then of course this Trump Dream Account, and never being able to get clear answers on exactly what this money will do, what does it look like, specifically for those Dream accounts in 18 years. Will those kiddos that we say we're investing in today actually be able to have money once they turn 18 and be able to access those? Something we hear and have heard, we're talking about it right now about access to health care and protecting sooner care and making sure that Oklahomans who need health insurance, who need access to health care services throughout the state, both in urban and rural Oklahoma, to see Republicans adamantly, multiple times, and thankful to the Senate Democrats who protected or at least got this measure to be on a general election ballot as opposed to a low turnout voter election to undo the will of the people. Oklahomans sent a mandate to the legislature saying, we want you to prioritize health care, no matter what. Make sure that health care is protected and that everybody has access to it. Child care in Tulsa, we know that over 1,000 child care centers or spots, for families to send their children. We've heard over and over again in the debates about the budget. There were conversations even last week when we were talking about, again, siphoning our public dollars into these private nonprofit organizations, that there's no such thing as child care centers closing or there's no such thing as spots being removed, and that's just not true. There's data showing that's not the case. Grocery prices continue to rise. I say this over and over again. We cannot control the price of eggs, milk, and bread, but we could tell corporations you're not going to use dynamic pricing to increase the price on everyday goods, on food access for people who need it based on their shopping behavior. And there are large corporations that have been pretty public about utilizing those digital price tags. And it's not the digital price tags that's the problem. It's the dynamic pricing. It's the watching your shopping behavior. And I think regardless of party or where you live, we can all agree that corporations should not be exploiting everyday working people to get basic things like food. And when I think about where we're at today in terms of, we're 2 weeks out, we're supposedly gaveling out tomorrow for sine die, just the work that we could have continued to do, we could continue doing. I'll elevate to, again, education funding, siphoning public dollars and giving it to private schools where there's no accountability, no transparency, when instead we could be ensuring that we lower class sizes, we raise teacher pay in a competitive way for educators and our support staff, and then not at all addressing the home insurance crisis that Oklahomans talk about over and over again. We've heard so much from the Republicans around property taxes, but it's insurance costs that are rising. That's really what's keeping people both from purchasing a home and then being able to stay in their home. And so when I look at where we're at, May 13th and tomorrow, again, possibly going sine die, Oklahomans are counting on us. They're not interested in us doing this dysfunctional back and forth, who's working longer, how many minutes. They just want to know that there's solutions at the end of the day, that they're going to be able to afford their rent and their mortgage, and they're going to be able to pay their insurance, and they're going to be able to put food on the table for their children, and that those public schools are going to be filled with educators who are compensated well. So, of course, every day we continue to champion working families. We'll continue to talk about the things that we know everyday folks are asking us to do. And getting away from, I'm really frustrated that we could not quite get away from these partisan issues that, the anti-immigration bills, the anti-abortion bills, again, that don't really solve any problems, but keep people really heightened emotionally. We know it's an election year and these issues are going to come up. And so plenty of missed opportunities, and I'm happy to pass it over to our assistant leader who's going to highlight some things that, we're very grateful for the good stuff that House Democrats were able to accomplish working in a bipartisan manner. All 40 of our bills passed the House and made it over to the Senate. And so while there are things that weren't great, we are going to celebrate the good as well.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Good something. Hello, Melissa Provenzano, Oklahoma House District 79 out of Tulsa, where the gas is $4.19 a gallon. I had to fill up.
Her picture.
Yeah, I had to drive halfway down the turnpike to find it just a little bit cheaper. And so that really has been sticking in my mind. But House Democrats, this year we focused on helping Oklahomans keep as much as possible in their pockets to give them a leg up when working towards a better job, to earn a little bit more, and a better life. We focused on creating the conditions and standards for early childhood care that give our little ones the best start at life and a safe environment to grow up in. We also focused on making sure that you can get to a health care provider in your town, no matter where you are in the state of Oklahoma. And we sought accountability when it comes to how we execute upon the will of the people. In short, show us the data and show us the money. We feel that we delivered on this effort, and we're proud to say these bills are now law and take effect later this year. Representative Ranson created an early childhood task force that looks at how better to support the care, health, and education of our youngest children. It puts all of the early childhood stakeholders and agencies in the same room at the same table to plan and strategize together. Representative Schreiber passed legislation requiring the director of the Department of Human Services to establish a master teacher-to-child ratio in our 2, 3, and 4-star child care facilities. That's going to make a difference. Representative Poggemiller created the Health Care Workforce Training Fund, which will focus on recruiting and retaining behavioral health clinicians in rural Oklahoma. I myself passed legislation that streamlines electrician certification renewal and reinstatement, as we are currently experiencing a shortage of electricians in our state. It'll encourage those that left the profession or moved out of the state to return to it, hopefully. And as well, in partnership with Senator Dossett, she and I worked to allow teachers to carry their career status to the next school that they may like to go on to. If you know that when you go to a new school, it resets, and you're brand new all over again. Provided the new school agrees, this encourages experienced teachers to stay in the profession and to work in the place where they feel happy to be and they choose to be. Representative Blansett codified how the incarceration savings are calculated from State Question 781 so that the proper amount of money can and should be appropriated towards court order rehab programs like mental health court, drug courts, and funding for women in recovery and residents. Representative Timmons created the Uniform Judicial Interview of Children Act, which governs how judges interview our littlest. We feel we were successful, definitely not everything that we wanted got across the line, but we will continue to press forward, and I believe now we'll take questions.
Can you guys talk about what you've heard from Republican leadership, what we can expect for tomorrow? I know there's a couple lingering issues like Medicaid, TSED, veto overrides. What have you guys been told to expect?
So we definitely haven't seen an agenda or a list yet. I do expect, of course, veto overrides, and I've looked at the ones coming from the House. I mean, since it's all happening in one day, it'll probably be pretty hectic. I do expect some conference committee reports, one of which I do believe will be Sooner Care State Question. You know, the question being, are we going to end up with something new, or is it going to be House Bill 4440 that's still sitting at the House? Those are the big things we expect. I know that we also need to take up some Senate bills that had House amendments, and we're not sure exactly which ones of those will be brought up.
Is there bills that you would like, or vetoed bills that you would like to see overrode?
Yeah, so the big ones that we pushed on, number one, Senator Mann had a great bill about Alzheimer's to try to have a better coordinator at our State Department of Health. That's one that we've asked for. Definitely OETA and the American Indian Education. And there's others we're definitely supportive of, but those are ones that we really prioritize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add there are 2 tribal bills, the gambling deduction bill, and then also sweepstakes, which is it's online gaming, but it's not sports betting. And so these are 2 bills that hopefully, and I know at least with the gaming deduction, the House took that up last week. So I don't know what the Senate's looking like, but those 2 we're keeping a close eye on as well.
What is your,
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
either of your caucus positions on the new version of Senate Bill 2, which would be wind farm, wind turbine setbacks?
I haven't seen those.
So I've read Senate Bill 2, which is on the wind farm setbacks, and I've been trying to gather information since I read it. So I think, what I heard from the pro tem is that it's a compromise among property owners and the wind community. I know that the wind industry is pleased that at least there's some clear guidelines. I'm not sure that they're happy about the distances. So I'm still gathering information right now, but I think it does look like a pretty reasonable compromise to try to help that industry move forward with some certainty.
As we're wrapping up this legislative session, I'm looking forward. What do you predict in terms of gaining, losing seats?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think this is an incredibly important year, and I'll be talking about campaigns a lot more when I'm outside the building. My official staff is looking at me with an eagle eye, but I know we're really proud how many great candidates are running across the state. The Oklahoma State Senate, we had 21 seats with Democrats running out of 25 seats. That's the highest we've had other than the teacher walkout year since 2006. Huge progress there, and I think what you're going to see there, even if they're not seats that are super viable for a Democrat, what you're going to see is forcing those conversations. We see people out knocking doors and visiting with people who haven't been visited by someone other than a Republican for a long time. And that's something we're trying to consistently do, is make sure people see the options, see the perspectives that are available there, which can be a challenge in a supermajority environment when there's only one perspective being presented consistently. So I feel really optimistic about this year and the kinds of conversations we can push forward. Anything you want to?
Thank you. I would say ditto. Also the eagle eye, but I think one of the things that we're pushing out is an awareness about all the state questions. Everyone will have something to vote on every election, in June, in August, November, no matter what, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, underwater basket weavers. And so everyone needs to engage in, to coin a phrase I keep hearing is we are 50th in voters showing up to the polls. And so you got to show up, you got to do your thing. And I think one of the veto overrides, well, there's a bill that requires, there's a state question, I believe, that even requires that we will be voting on in August that deals with voter ID. And so I think folks need to read up and be very in the know about what we're voting on. We were concerned and pushed back, and thankfully, on a lot of the state questions that were set to go to August, and now pushing to or November, or not being heard at all. But still, there are two there that we definitely need to focus on.
Munson, can I get your thoughts on SB2?
Yeah, I would say that I have not looked at the updated version. I'm glad to hear. Thank you, Leader Kirt, for letting us know that there's. It sounds like that folks came to the table and worked together, and that is positive to hear. But I will take a look at the legislation in more detail before I share. But obviously, controversial bill and interesting to put it on the last day. But yeah, I'll take a look at it some more. Thank you.
The House Speaker had an email on Friday about, the timeline of the events between the Senate and House. You mentioned at the end about may have to work with the governor about a special session. Mm-hmm. Did you two receive the email, and what do y'all think about that idea?
Yeah, it sounds like the entire House received the email, including the media. And so, I will say this, we have plenty of time to get things done. By the Constitution, we can go until May 29th at 5 p.m. And I think it is interesting to me that, both the leaders of the House and the Senate of the Republican caucuses said that we want to get done early. We want to work on a budget. They were championing this. They were patting themselves on the back for it. And now here we are 2 weeks out of when we actually have to sine die according to the Constitution. And now did we forget about policy? Did we forget about veto overrides and some of these other things that we need to do? And I think bringing us back into special session, costing taxpayers more dollars to hash out some things that are probably we label more controversial than actually solving problems for everyday people is probably not worth our time or our money. We have plenty of time to get things done now, and it's too bad that instead of sitting down and negotiating what that looks like, there's emails and social media posts being sent out when they could be sitting in a room together and figuring out which bills are going to be heard in both chambers.
There are a ton of elections coming up in the metro specifically that won't have incumbents running in them. A lot of those will likely go to Democrats. So how are you guys preparing for those new lawmakers and serving OKC's interests?
Well, Senate Democrats, all the incumbents are not challenged. So all 6 of our incumbents are going to be helping other campaigns and are going to be working on legislation for next year. So that's, one nice thing about being in the Senate is having 4 years. So even Senator Mann and Senator Nice, who were elected with partial terms, are getting now 4 years uncontested. So I think they'll be out in community listening and creating some good legislation. That's what I expect. I'd love some new legislators. That'd be great. Anything you want to add?
Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I know that we have some open seats in the House that will not have a Republican challenger, and so we will be greeting new members no matter what. which is a good deal. And so we're looking forward to that. We, just because we adjourn sine die doesn't mean the work stops, as you all well know. And so, we'll be back at it within a few weeks, and then recurring meetings and planning and strategy for when we walk in the doors in February. It never stops. So more members, good.
Leader Carri,
sorry.
what have your conversations been over the last week with members or leaders of the Freedom Caucus? You don't agree on a lot of issues, but you both have expressed frustration about how last week unfolded, and there are occasionally instances where folks on diametric opposite sides of a lot of issues are on the same side of either a procedural issue or a specific policy issue. So I was curious what conversations you've had.
Well, so, I would say the Freedom Caucus and their actions this year conveniently have sometimes really aligned with what we think is best for Oklahomans. Working in tandem with them is very difficult. I'll say that, a lot of the way they work is chaos and surprise. And so I wouldn't say that, we're not having regular meetings to strategize. I will say that we are looking at where there are leverage points that we can accentuate in order to do what's best for the public. Conveniently, sometimes that's happened with Freedom Caucus's help, whether they like it or not. So, not recent conversations. I would say they're having very consistent meetings. They're continuing to demonize Democrats and demonize the majority Republicans, and so I don't really have an interest in negotiating with them unless it's in the best interest of the public.
Well, one bill in particular that I know some of their membership has struggled about, and you talked about Thursday, maybe it was, I can't remember, is what is now Senate Bill 740, which is the Cyndi Clementure Act, which trades the law regarding child sexual abuse, eliminating the statute of limitations, and eliminating the use of NDAs in such cases. What is your sense of whether do you think that needs to come to the floor? Do you think these issues that were shucked in House bills and put into Senate bills, or maybe I said that wrong, do you think those should be considered tomorrow?
Yeah, we're looking at that full list of Senate bills that got amended this afternoon as a caucus. We haven't met as a caucus to go through those individually, but I will say, I support justice for victims of sexual assault and abuse, even long after the fact. And I know that powerful systems can keep that silence, and certainly Senator Hicks could add to that from the Sexual Assault Review Board. But, that's a bill I personally support. We've had a wide variety of bills that our Republican colleagues have been asking us to help advocate for, which has been an interesting experience because of the numbers. They really have asked us to join with them to speak up to the floor leader on certain bills, and I'm glad to do so when it makes sense.
Senator Hicks, any thoughts on that? She said your name, so
I know. Well, I've been serving on the SAFE board, the Sexual Assault Forensic Examiners Board at the Attorney General's office by appointment from the pro tem for the past 2 years. I'm by no means doing it justice to Senator Floyd, who previously held this position, but I'm doing my best. How about that? And really what we're looking at in totality is whether or not there should be a statute of limitations on anyone's case. When you have a positive CODIS hit, or a forensic match, but the victim is unable to seek justice because of statute of limitations, because the state or the law enforcement entity failed to process that evidence in a timely manner, that's a systems failure. And so really, in conversations with the SAFE board, one comment was made was that anybody who would want to maintain the statute of limitations must be in support of predators. And I know that is a harsh line, but I really feel like it speaks to the heart of, if you have forensic evidence to bring someone justice, and the reason that they're not able to prosecute that individual is simply because of an arbitrary timeline that the government set, then we need to rethink those limits.
So I'm guessing you support the proposal?
I did see, actually, I think it was in another southern state. They just passed Trey's Law yesterday. So I have been following the conversations around, kind of just the national movement, but I haven't looked at the specific language here in Oklahoma yet.
Senator, I have a question about the Medicaid proposal. I know you were part of the conference committee that would have looked at the new language under HJR 1067, which is now in a Senate Administrative Rules bill. Can can you give some insight into what you know about why that wasn't signed off on by senators and what
Well,
the issues were?
so on the Sooner Care state question, there was some language that was pretty confusing in terms of the way the match was talked about and in terms of how they talked about the execution of moving language from Constitution to statute. That's what I heard in terms of concerns. Senator Hicks and I identified 8 to 10 real problems with that bill that we expressed. I believe there's going to be another conference report. That's my understanding. And that because I do think that the Senate didn't like how the House had drafted it, and I don't know, what the House was working from. I do think I have big concerns no matter what. I mean, the language carves out 100% matched populations, which would be our tribal citizens who get 100% federal match for Sooner Care expansion for working people. It carves it out, but it still puts it in statute. So the legislature could change it at any time. So I have real problems with all these things being put where the legislature can literally change it next week. So I still had grave concerns about 1067. Yeah. Anything y'all know, add? No? I love also that you think conference committees, that we get informed. We do go and look for information.
Yeah.
But.
I think you summed it up.
Okay. Anything else y'all want to cover? Well, thank you so much for coming. I'll let Munson get the last word since this may be your last leader deal. But
thank you. We appreciate. Just thank you. We appreciate y'all being here. Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.